Hi, I'm Amy Gaumer Erickson, and today I'm going to provide an overview of the College and Career Competency Framework and instructional practices for teaching intrapersonal and interpersonal competencies. The purpose of this framework is to support educators in systematically embedding intrapersonal and interpersonal competencies into their course content. The competencies are integral to in-school and post-school success, as determined by current and emerging research. Our website, cccframework.org, provides free resources and tools to help you apply the information that you learned today. To further support educators, we recently published a book, The Skills That Matter, Teaching Interpersonal and Intrapersonal Competencies in Any Classroom. It's available from Corwin Press. This book provides an overview as well as detailed research, instructional practices, and examples on 5 competencies: self-efficacy, self-regulation, goal setting, assertiveness, and conflict management. The College and Career Competency Framework was developed by Dr. Pattie, Noonah, and myself. We are both associate research professors at the University of Kansas. My background is in secondary education. I have taught language arts, math, special education, physical education, and coached track and football. I've taught in middle and high schools, in rural, suburban, urban, charter, and alternative environments. Across all of these schools, I found that it often wasn't students' academic ability that impeded their learning. In most cases, it was their intrapersonal and interpersonal skills. Pattie's background is in adult services. She worked in human resources and as a job developer. She also found that it wasn't adults' content knowledge that impeded their employment. I bet you can guess which competencies these adults need to work on. Those in the intra and interpersonal domains. Pattie and I met while getting our doctorate degrees in secondary school reform and special education transition policy at KU. In talking to administrators, counselors, general and special education teachers, career technical instructors, higher education faculty, parents, and employers, everyone wanted to help youth develop skills that would help them be more successful, but they were all using their own terms and working in isolation. Pattie and I started looking for ways to create a common vision and language for all roles to collaborate in supporting all students to develop these competencies. After frustratingly realizing the limitations of existing resources, we developed the College and Career Competency Framework. Today's learning targets are that you will be able to explain the competency framework to a colleague, describe the implementation roadmap with key features in the exploration and installation stages. You will have begun exploring outcomes and instructional strategies to teach 2 of the competencies, and you will know how to access a plethora of resources. Today I'll spend approximately 10 minutes providing an overview of the competency wheel, about 20 minutes describing instructional practices that enable students to learn and practice specific competencies, and about 15 minutes describing the implementation roadmap and free resources. This is the College and Career Competency Wheel. Pause for a minute to think about your personal career path. Which 3 competencies had the greatest impact? If you're watching this with others, share briefly. Did you choose competencies in the intrapersonal domain, interpersonal, cognitive? Note there is a balance between these 3 domains and the fading in the coloring. The terms on the wheel are called a variety of things, such as soft skills, social emotional skills, employability skills, leadership skills, or professional skills. In 2012, the National Academy of Sciences defined skills needed for success as falling into 3 domains: intrapersonal, interpersonal, and cognitive. These are depicted on the outside ring of the wheel. We found that these terms resonated with individuals across roles and show the balance that is necessary for in-school and post-school success. The intrapersonal domain focuses on students' internal reflective capabilities. The interpersonal domain focuses on capacities related to cooperation and interaction with others. And the cognitive domain focuses on effectively processing and using information. Now look at the wheel again. Focus on the intrapersonal and interpersonal domain. Pause for a moment to consider which competencies you'd like students to further develop. I'm sure that each of you had no difficulty identifying competencies that you'd like your students to develop. The competency wheel promotes a common language with students, teachers, employers, community members, law enforcement, etc. We can embed these competencies into our instruction, and this will positively impact students with disabilities, gifted students, those at risk, and those on track, regardless of the student's career path. All students can learn to and expand their intrapersonal and interpersonal competencies through instruction and integration within content area learning. The CCC framework is different from other soft skills programs in that it is not a box curriculum. It is not as effective to just add an elective or teach these skills in advisory. The framework offers educators a way to develop competencies, enhance academic learning at the same time, through educator expertise and innovation in their curriculum. Students experience how these skills are relevant across curricula and contexts, and through practice they generalize and are able to transfer their learning. It's not hard to find media coverage on the concerns from colleges and employers and the need for these competencies, but we can't just admire the problem. Intrapersonal and interpersonal factors are critical for success in jobs and academic performance and worth the investment to develop. Research has shown that many competencies have direct positive relationship to in-school and post-school success. Conclusions from the National Academy of Sciences were an impetus for our work in developing the framework. Educators see these competencies as important and are trying to help students develop them. But most educators are currently working in isolation. Systematic instruction and sustained practice across the curriculum is necessary. States, schools, and educators are already working to address these challenges. Many states, including Kansas, have developed social-emotional standards. States are also implementing individual plans of study that are focused on using data to determine post-school goals, and then designing a high school experience that supports students to reach these goals. If you're in special education, you've been doing this since the 1990s through transition planning requirements in the IEP. In each of your roles, you likely have participated in professional development that touched on many of these competencies. We actually started with a list of 99 terms identified in media, articles, education for life and work, and other works that cross multiple disciplines, including counseling, engineering, business, special education, school leadership, and coaching. We conducted literature reviews on each of these 99 terms. We dropped terms that didn't have a research base, showing that they improved in-school and post-school outcomes. We also dropped traits that were not teachable. We then combine terms that have the same body of research. For example, in the research, grit and perseverance mean the same thing. So in our final wheel, we chose to go with perseverance because this term has more than 30 years of research, while grit is a more recently popular term. We found that many terms such as leadership, self-determination, and executive functioning to actually be a combination of other competencies. Finally, to stay on the wheel, the competency had to be measurable and generalizable across education, employment, and other settings. The extensive literature review process got us to the 26 competencies that you now see on the wheel. You can find condensed versions of the review of research, assessments, and evidence-based instructional practices in the teacher guide for each competency. These are available in the resources section of cccframework.org. I said that some terms, such as leadership, were a combination of other competencies. Pause for a minute and consider which competencies make a good leader. You likely thought about competencies such as integrity, perseverance, adaptability, critical thinking, and conflict management, just to name a few. 26 competencies is still too much for a school to take on school-wide, so we have further research to determine foundational competencies that help students develop others. These are the competencies that we cover in the skills that matter: self-efficacy, self-regulation, goal setting, assertiveness, and conflict management. We also consider self-awareness and empathy to be vital in the full development of these 5 competencies, so we have pulled instruction on these 2 competencies within the other 5. To determine the foundational competencies to focus on first, we use 2 methods. First, these competencies were referenced in the research for other competencies. Second, we asked teens what they needed help learning. In 2015, results from more than 3,000 students that took the needs assessment showed that students consistently rate themselves low in specific competencies. The results are consistent across years. Here's the data from almost 1,500 students across 45 schools in 2017. Here, we have converted the scores to a 100-point scale to ease interpretation. You can think about these scores similarly to grades. Educators can use the Competency Framework Needs Assessment to ask students which competencies they are the strongest in and which ones they need to work on. We have programmed the needs assessment and many competency questionnaires into our free website. Educators create a login to launch a questionnaire. This allows you to see aggregate results from all of your students, as well as their individual results. You can also download an Excel file of all results. The questionnaires are self-report assessments with reading levels from 5th to 7th grade. They can be read aloud and items can be explained to students. When students complete a questionnaire, they immediately receive an automatically generated summary report. This can be used to facilitate reflection. Every student has personal strengths and areas of growth. It is also possible for parents to complete a questionnaire thinking about their child's past performance. There is a short video available that walks you through how to create an account and launch a questionnaire and view the results. To summarize, the competencies aren't new, and you are already working to support students in developing many of these competencies. The challenge is systematically providing instruction and application of the competencies for all students, focusing on the aspects that current research has identified as most important. The CCC framework is designed around 3 questions: why, what, and how. Why focus on the college and career competency framework? Our vision, and hopefully yours too, is to develop socially and emotionally engaged, career-equipped, lifelong learners. Our mission is to help educators enhance what they are already doing. The framework offers an approach for systematically and comprehensively teaching teachers how to develop students' competencies. Administrators, counselors, teachers, and other educational professionals can work with students on these within their role and within what they already do. All students, including those who are labeled as gifted, with a disability, at risk, or on track, benefit from this instruction. The CCC framework doesn't have to be a new initiative that you add to all the other things you're doing. Think of it instead as a way to be a more effective teacher by teaching skills that shift responsibility from the teacher to the student. Now let's go a little deeper into the what. This is basically the competency wheel. As I said earlier, to make it on the wheel, the competency has to have research showing that development improved in-school and post-school outcomes and that it has to be teachable. I want to talk a little bit more about this. In 2011, Dirkland and colleagues found an 11 percentile gain on standardized math and reading tests through teaching social emotional competencies. In 2015, the Teachers College at Columbia University found that every dollar invested in social skills instruction resulted in an $11 economic return to the community. Look at this abbreviated list of research conclusions. Pause for a minute and consider, which outcomes did you expect, and which ones are you surprised to see? All three domains are important. Schools already have a strong foundation in the cognitive domain, so our professional development focuses primarily on the interpersonal and intrapersonal domains. Can the competencies be taught? Yes. Research over and over again has shown that students can learn and expand their competencies through instruction and integration within content area learning and experiences. Let's pause and practice synthesizing what you just heard. Describe to someone next to you or jot down a few key points regarding how the competencies on the wheel were identified and why these competencies are important. This is the process an individual goes through when installing a competency. Today, we are going to focus on the first bullet. The next step is to determine how you'll enhance your content area instruction by integrating competency instruction and practice within your course. When providing competency training, we have every teacher create a 2 to 3 week instructional plan that we then review and provide feedback on. After providing instruction and practice with feedback, it's important to analyze the results through a database decision-making process. This results in refinement of competency instruction. Once students are proficient in a competency, you can move into reinforcement. Reinforcement here does not mean negative consequences if a student forgets to demonstrate the competency. It means reminders, prompts, reteaching, and recognition when they use and generalize the competency. These 6 instructional criteria are all addressed when providing quality competency instruction. They likely look pretty similar to the process that you use for teaching academic content. To effectively provide competency instruction, you must address all 6 instructional criteria. The research term is implementation fidelity. Pause for a minute and consider, could a 20-minute lesson on assertiveness teach all 6 instructional criteria? No, we can't just tell students what assertiveness is. We have to go deeper. They have to understand the competency and how it applies to them personally. Reflect on it and then truly practice it for themselves across time with feedback and reflection that is ongoing. A 20-minute lesson wouldn't be enough for students to become proficient at the quadratic formula or writing a 5-paragraph essay. So why would we ever think it would be enough to teach intrapersonal and interpersonal competencies? Let's look a little deeper at a couple competencies. Self-regulation refers to proactively applying self-directed processes, cognitive behaviors, and emotions to attain goals and skills. There are 4 essential components to self-regulation. Make a plan for what you want to accomplish. Immediately monitor progress and interference toward your goal. Take control and make changes by implementing specific strategies when things are not going as planned. And reflect on what worked and what you can do differently next time. Each competency has essential components, which we have depicted as posters that you can download from cccframework.org. In order to self-regulate, students must do all 4 components. Self-regulation can be applied to managing emotions and self-calming, focusing on specific tasks while avoiding distractions, completing homework, studying for a test, or meeting high standards on a project, sustaining focus on a goal across years, and implementing self-care behaviors. If our students struggle to self-regulate, we often regulate for them. Having trouble staying focused? Sit right here and complete your homework. Don't remember what your homework is? Here's another copy. The other frequently used option is to punish. Didn't do your homework? You earned a 0. That'll teach you. Neither of these options actually teach students how to self-regulate. Instead, we need to help students learn and practice these 4 components of self-regulation. We all still work on self-regulation. In the past 5 years, have you at some point tried to eat healthier, exercise more, drink more water, or save money? Have you had a plan to do one of these things that has not been fully successful? Let's think through the components. Did your plan lack specificity? Did you forget to monitor your plan? Did something like an illness get you off track? Did you adjust your plan? Did you reflect throughout the process, focusing on both what was going well and what you could do differently? Which component is the most challenging for you? Let's look at the composite results for over 5,500 students in 2017. Which component do they rate themselves the highest? Which component do they rate themselves the lowest? Across the board, the lowest component is planning. Pause for a minute to consider. Why do you think planning is the lowest? There are 2 main themes that I typically hear. 1, students don't know how to plan. And 2, we often tell them the plan instead of helping them create their own plan. We often tell students the steps they need to take, short-term due dates for long-term projects. These are examples of us regulating for students. We're working toward gradual release of responsibility, so don't completely stop doing these things, but work to build the capacity for students to create their own self-regulation plans. We all know that grading on a rubric is a good instructional practice, but does it support self-regulation? Using a rubric to grade helps students know the criteria, but unless they have been taught, many students don't know how to use a rubric to plan or monitor, so a rubric alone may not support self-regulation. A science teacher that I worked with had all students use a rubric for a science project. She had students read the rubric before starting on the project and determine the criteria that they were aiming for. Students then created detailed plans that included timelines, supplies they would need, actions that they'd take, other commitments that might interfere, and support they might need. They shared their plans with each other to see if they were missing anything, and the teacher provided feedback. The teacher frequently prompted students to reflect and monitor their progress in implementing their plans and determine if they needed to make adjustments. She asked questions and brainstormed with students if they got off track. When nearing completion, the students reviewed the rubric to determine whether they were missing any components or needed to make additional revisions. In the end, 98% of the students earned a B or higher on the rubric. When asked, the students said they were less stressed because they knew what to do and had a plan to do it. In this example, the rubric helps students plan, monitor, take action, and make changes and reflect. Through the gradual release of responsibility, this usually starts with facilitation by the teacher, and then over time, students are able to become more independent in using a rubric and making an effective plan. To switch from doing for to coaching requires a shift from telling to questioning. This keeps us from assuming we know what will work for someone else. Let's consider this student with ADHD. Self-regulation has always been a struggle for him. His mother realized that she wasn't helping him be successful when she would make him sit at the kitchen table, put his homework in front of him, and sit next to him, reminding him to concentrate until the work was done. She switched to asking questions. What homework do you have? If he didn't know, she had him check the teacher's websites instead of her previous strategy of checking the teacher websites for him. Then the questions continued. I'll let you read them. The result was that he started taking ownership for his homework, when and where he would do it, and how he would get it all done by a certain time that he determined for himself. In the end, he learned more, earned better grades, and his relationship with his mother became more positive. As teachers, we can follow the same process of asking questions to help students plan instead of telling them what would work for us. Many teachers have used these questions to help students plan homework completion, studying for a unit test, or using class time wisely. A special education teacher that I worked with tried the same process, but after the student determined the homework that he needed to do, she asked what he could accomplish without help in the next 10 minutes. Once he determined this, he stayed focused and worked independently for 10 minutes, and then the process repeated. Eventually, the student was able to work independently for longer increments. Here is what the instructional process looks like with denoted student and teacher behavior. After teaching the basics of self-regulation, the students are able to start becoming more independent in their practice by answering questions. The teacher then prompts, provides feedback, and coaches, but doesn't do it for the student. So what changes if you teach self-regulation? Here are the top 10 outcomes that teachers identified after providing instruction, practice, and feedback on self-regulation. This data is from 112 teachers across 2 states. These teachers addressed all of the instructional criteria for teaching self-regulation. Pause and choose one of these outcomes that you would like to see improve in your students. If you're wondering how competency instruction could fit within your course content, look through these outcomes from a few specific teachers. It's important to note that teachers saw these results within 3 to 6 weeks after being trained in self-regulation. You can find many more self-regulation examples and instructional ideas on cccframework.org. At the end of this session, I'll outline the resources that are available. Pause for a minute. If you're sitting near someone else, share how you currently support students to self-regulate. and what you're going to do in the future to expand instruction and practice in self-regulation. Jot down a few ideas. Before we move on from self-regulation, I want to emphasize again how important the planning component is. As I mentioned, this is students' lowest component. Planning is more than writing a to-do list or setting short-term due dates. It includes thinking through and typically writing down the details as well as making contingency plans. Students can think about contingency plans as if-thens. If this happens, then I will. When students are just starting to learn self-regulation, they often need to talk about these plans with others to determine if they lack specificity. Teachers can also provide students with feedback on their plans to increase their likelihood of success. Teachers can then prompt students to monitor their plans and make changes when they get off track. As teachers, we can monitor their monitoring and facilitate students' reflection throughout the entire process. Now we are going to talk briefly about assertiveness. Even when it's difficult, expressing your wants, needs, and thoughts while respecting others. These components are the required elements of assertiveness. They also become guidelines for our instruction. If you express yourself but don't show respect, your behavior is aggressive. If you are respectful but don't express yourself, your behavior is passive. To be assertive, you must do both components simultaneously. Pause and consider this question. Share with another person if possible. If students were more assertive, what other competencies might this impact? If we are assertive, our teamwork, conflict management, and networking likely improve. Communication and assertiveness are definitely related, supporting each other. Practicing the respect component might help us develop empathy. Learning how to express ourselves will likely increase our self-efficacy and our ability to express ourselves in the future. Assertiveness may help us take initiative and persevere toward our long-term goals. We may have to assert ourselves to maintain our integrity. Here are highlights from research on assertiveness. These studies provided us the definition, components, and what goes into teaching assertiveness. We have translated the information from research into usable products for teachers. Assertiveness is sought after by several professions, including nursing, education, and law, and often has a direct bearing on an individual's professional achievements and income. We have developed competency overview videos that provide educators with a snapshot of the definition, components, and research, as well as instructional practices related to each competency. While I won't show it now, these videos are a great refresher and an easy way to share information about a competency with others. Consider these two descriptions of students. Do you know students with similar characteristics? How could assertiveness help these students? These are actually two of my children a few years ago. I have been working to help them move to the assertiveness sweet spot, and they have both made substantial progress. But practice is an ongoing endeavor. Even students who have a good home life and highly involved parents don't necessarily know how to be assertive and use assertiveness when they need it. Let's look a little deeper at the aggressive example. Historically, we have followed this model. When students are aggressive or disrespectful, they are punished, and the assumption is they will learn their lesson. Take a moment and write down your definition of learning. I like to think of learning as going from not knowing to knowing, from not being able to do to doing. Punishments like detentions or suspensions tell students what not to do. But do these consequences teach students alternatives for when they encounter similar situations in the future? As I mentioned earlier, student questionnaires are available for many of the competencies. Here are the results for 6th through 12th grade students. In analyzing the data, there was no statistically significant difference between males and females or between grade levels. Overall, students gave themselves about a C- in both the assertiveness components, identifying this competency as one they need to further develop. In order to truly understand assertiveness, it's important to understand the concepts of passive and aggressive communication. Passive, assertive, and aggressive communication behaviors are all appropriate at various times. In an emergency situation, you want someone to be aggressive and start barking orders like call 911. Assertiveness is a choice, and it often takes planning and practice. Understanding assertive, passive, and aggressive behaviors is a key to teaching assertiveness and a key to students' ability to practice that sweet spot of assertiveness. In order to effectively express themselves, students may need to analyze their emotions. Graphics such as this one can help students identify specific emotions that they can clearly communicate. It takes practice, such as scenarios, role plays, or determining the feelings of historical figures or characters in a book to become proficient at determining emotions and when and how to express yourself. One strategy for respecting others is to use listening and paraphrasing to understand the perspective of others. When we understand others, we are able to express empathy and show respectful assertion. Once students know both components, they can put it all together in an assertive statement. The statement begins with an empathy statement, or indication that you understand another person's perspective or feelings. The second part is the rationale behind the action, and the third part is a clear, direct statement of what you want to happen. Students can practice creating assertive statements for various scenarios or related to course content. More importantly, students who are being aggressive or passive can be prompted to rephrase to assertive statements. This can help students who are expressing themselves in either a passive or aggressive manner. It also promotes group discussions, debates, and collaborative teamwork. Here are example scenarios that students could modify into assertive statements. This technique can also be used to help students learn to advocate for themselves, ask for help when they need it, and resist peer pressure. Protective assertion is adhering to our boundaries by communicating these boundaries with others. Personal boundaries are the behaviors that we find acceptable and unacceptable toward us. Boundaries help us maintain mental health, including feeling calmer, happier, and less stressed. Students can brainstorm and identify boundaries, and then create assertive statements that they can use when someone crosses a boundary. When we put it all together, by teaching students both components of assertiveness and how to express themselves assertively, students are able to practice and apply the skills across situations. We can continue to facilitate practice during group work, discussions, and real-life situations, such as asking a boss for time off or explaining to a teacher that you don't understand an assignment. We all have to continue to practice assertiveness, So even after students have learned the skill, we need to facilitate this practice. Pause for a minute. If you're sitting near someone else, share how you currently support students to be assertive and what you're going to do in the future to expand instruction and practice of assertiveness. Jot down a few ideas. Now let's look a little deeper at the how. These are the implementation elements that make the work successful. I've given examples of how you personally could teach and provide practice with feedback on self-regulation and assertiveness. But by working with others, you can have an even deeper impact. In a multi-tiered system of supports, all students receive core instruction across academics, behavior, and social-emotional skills. Data is used to determine which students need additional support in any of these areas. Interventions aligned with core instruction are provided to boost our students' skills. When it comes to interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies, your school may already have some Tier 2 and 3 interventions in place, but few schools have a strong Tier 1 framework, teaching specific competencies to all students. After you develop a strong core in a competency, you will likely expand on some of your existing interventions. But first, just like with teaching reading or math, we have to systematically implement a strong core in competency development. It is vital that all students learn and practice the competencies over time and in multiple contexts. Everything in education should include data-based decision-making. Competency instruction is no different. Data-based decision-making isn't a single activity. It's an ongoing process of gathering and interpreting, sharing data to understand trends and inform important decisions. In this process, educators, administrators, and other stakeholders use data to set goals and create plans to enact change and monitor progress. Data guide improvements at all levels of the education system, from data regarding a single student to school-wide data. When it comes to the development of intrapersonal and interpersonal competencies, in education, we have each historically worked in isolation. The impact can be far greater through collaboration across roles, content areas, and even beyond the school. In your school, and likely your own classroom, there are projects, experiences, and extracurricular activities that support development of these competencies. These might include work-based learning or internships, student council, FFA, team sports, or musicals. Let's think about work-based learning and internships for a moment. Why are these important? They provide opportunities for students to apply the competencies in real-life settings. We have had many employers tell us that they had difficulty providing feedback to adolescents regarding their work performance. But when they used the competency wheel, they were able to highlight the students' strengths and areas to focus on for growth. Some human resource departments have even adopted the competency wheel for employee performance and counseling. Vocational rehabilitation has also used the competency wheel to support adults in developing vocational skills that lead to competitive employment. Some communities have expanded collaboration even further, working with law enforcement, community service providers, and families to use a common language that builds a shared vision for success. When adolescents see how a competency can be learned in a language arts class and applies to other classes, to their jobs, and to the social interactions with the friends, the competency becomes generalized, with the adolescent ready to use the skill they have learned in any context that they encounter. To summarize the how, here are a few key points that we have learned from working with schools. It takes practice over time, and competencies cannot be absorbed. But we can address competencies in a systematic way. Now it's your turn. Pause and try to place each term under the what, the why, and the how. How did you do? The College and Career Competency Roadmap was created to provide schools a clear understanding of their progression in competency instruction implementation. Years ago, our training wasn't as detailed, and we found that it resulted in superficial competency instruction, such as reading a competency definition at the beginning of the day or sending a competency of the month email. Implementation lacked depth in instruction and students' practice of the competency. The roadmap provides a clear path to learning, implementing, and scaling up competency instruction. The stages of implementation are outlined in implementation research. They are the same whether you're adopting a new initiative, new curriculum, different IT system, or one-to-one devices. Exploration is a critical place to start for any initiative. This is one of the purposes of the overview and numerous free resources. Through exploration, you are able to explain why competency instruction is important and how a competency can be taught across time embedded within course content. You can determine how competency instruction fits within or dovetails with current school priorities. In installation, a team implements competency instruction, including all 6 instructional criteria. Then the team analyzes the quality of their instruction and impact on students, using data to refine instruction. Here is an example of a team teaching specific competencies with some students. They determine what works well regarding instruction and how to guide students to practice the competency in meaningful ways with ongoing feedback. The team determined short-term outcomes that resulted from instruction, students' individual practice, and feedback. This stage is important for determining what works with your students and using the results to gain buy-in from other educators. As you can see from this example, the instruction was very strong in assertiveness, but not as strong in conflict management. The school might be ready to move to the next stage for assertiveness, but will likely need to refine instruction in conflict management before going school-wide. Initial implementation is where an innovation is first being used as intended. In the CCC framework, this means teaching one or more competencies across the grade level, content area, or entire school. It includes training and coaching staff, implementing instructional practices that facilitate students' practice of the competency, and making data-based decisions. There are 5 initial implementation goals, which I'll give you a moment to read. Many of us want to jump right to this stage, but by seeing what really works with our students in our context, we can then promote, guide, and support school-wide implementation. Even resistors are willing to try something that has worked to improve student learning in other classrooms at their schools. Let's look at a school-wide initial implementation example. This high school in a mid-sized town implemented competency instruction with school-wide positive reinforcement of self-regulation with a little goal setting and self-efficacy. They collected baseline data in the fall semester. Then they implemented their school-wide instruction, practice, and reinforcement starting in January, and they collected data again in the spring. These are a few of their outcomes. For those of you who like graphs, here's their outcomes in graph format. Their behavior screening data improved. They saw a substantial increase in grades for 9th graders, and their office disciplinary data improved. Continuing on with this high school, attendance improved, in-school suspensions decreased in half, and out-of-school suspensions went from 13 in the fall to 3 in the spring. I can't guarantee that every school will see this dramatic of a change in one semester, but we have seen time and time again that purposeful instruction in even one competency has a dramatic impact on engagement, academic, and behavior outcomes. Finally, we get to full implementation. In this level, educators are using an effective innovation with fidelity, and the innovation becomes the standard way of work. Implementation is not impacted by staff retiring. New staff develop the skills to effectively carry out the innovation. In the CCC framework, this means that specific competencies are fully embedded within the school culture. Parents and community members share the common vision. No student exits your school without knowing the competency, practicing the competency on numerous occasions, receiving feedback, and generalizing the competency across contexts. The roadmap, which is downloadable at cccframework.org, provides specific indicators that indicate successful transfer to practice. Even if you're working in isolation, you can use the roadmap to ensure that your instruction addresses all 6 instructional criteria. You can also begin helping others explore the college and career competency framework. Now it's time to quiz yourself. See if you can answer these 5 questions. The interpersonal domain relates to cooperation and interaction with others, while the intrapersonal domain focuses on internal reflective capacities. There are many acceptable answers to number 3. To make it on the wheel, the competencies have to be research-based, teachable, distinct, generalizable, and measurable. Practice is absolutely vital. Students have to practice and be able to demonstrate all components of a competency. It is the way they learn and apply the competency. It's also how they go about generalizing the skill to see how it can work in other settings, in other contexts. For number 5, I hope you put you are. We are all responsible for competency instruction, but we don't have to do it alone. We can involve other educators, parents, employers, and community members. On cccframework.org, we have provided a variety of free resources focused on each of the competencies. These include teacher guides that provide the research behind the competency, videos which are designed for educators and provide an overview of the competency, the components, and the research, posters which provide the competency components in student-friendly language. Remember, when teaching a competency, students must learn every component and then put it all together in order to be able to fully know that competency. As previously discussed, student questionnaires are easy-to-use free online tools that help get a sense of students' understanding and use of the competencies. And finally, we have Padlets. We have scoured the web for you, and the Padlets provide the one-stop shop for instructional strategies, videos, and activities that you can use to embed competency instruction within your course content. Also on our website, we provide this 4-minute video, which says much of what I just took an hour to tell you. If you want to start a discussion or share information with others, this is a great place to start. As with all the resources I've shared, this is available for free on cccframework.org. In addition to the resources available for educators, we also have a few resources geared to involving families in helping students develop intrapersonal and interpersonal competencies. Now for your next steps. Here are my expectations of you in the next 2 weeks. Explore the resources on the website. Share information about the framework with a colleague. Follow through on the action items that you identified for self-regulation and assertiveness. And if possible, I challenge you to go deeper in self-regulation and assertiveness by developing an instructional plan that addresses each of the 6 instructional criteria. Email your plan to me at agaumer@ku.edu and I will provide you with feedback. If you would like additional professional development on the College and Career Competency Framework, contact Pattie, Noonah, or myself. We, along with a cadre of highly skilled trainers, provide both face-to-face and virtual training for individuals, school teams, and school-wide to all staff. We work with schools as they progress through the stages of implementation and provide substantially more resources, including example instructional plans that address all 6 criteria and lessons that can be taught school-wide to address the first 3 instructional criteria. We facilitate the development of instructional plans and provide feedback to each educator. We also facilitate your database decision-making process to help you identify impacts and refine your instruction. As I said earlier, our mission is to help educators enhance what they're already doing with the vision of developing socially and emotionally engaged, career-equipped, lifelong learners. Thank you for joining me today.